I would like to add at the beginning of the video, this may be triggering for some people. So if we
Yes.
could Charlotte to say that, and we'll just have her as the
Here
warning.
she comes. Okay, yeah, I like that. Charlotte, hello. She's just connecting to audio. Hi, good morning.
Morning. I'm sorry about my tardiness.
Oh my goodness, you're the main star here. You can just have the rock star parking and be as late as you want. Happy to have you join us. How are you this morning?
Oh, I'm good. Yeah.
Just like meditating and calm space and whatever.
Yeah, it's a daily practice. So
I admire that. That's something I would like to move towards. I'm not very good at that.
it's really connected to like me embracing who I am and my coming out. So like my spirituality is very much entwined with my queerness. And it was something that I worked on for a long time, my spirituality, but I couldn't completely connect to it until I owned where it was coming from and who I am.
That was so important to me, that this is y'all's voice. Because Michelle came to me months ago, because I'm non-binary, gender fluid, and was asking questions. And I said, Michelle, I do not have the same experience as trans. I said, I'm under the same umbrella, but I just do not have the same experiences. I can give you experiences, and I can give you terms, and I can give you all that for my little tiny community, but the bigger, broader community that deals with so much more, we need to reach out to them, and we need to make sure that their voice is heard, and we need to make sure that they are comfortable and they are seen and they are welcomed within our group. And then we started seeing some hate, and Michelle and I were like, okay, we need to get on this. We need to figure out what we need to do, because I swear, if anybody deserves the title of woman, it is trans women. You guys go through so much, and you're such beautiful people, and we just really want to express this in the video.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that. And I also want to, I love complexity and I love the intersections. And so like part of me is non-binary, so there's overlap there.
Wow, beautiful. I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not like tending towards the masculine, but I have masculine qualities that I'm not going to change. I don't want to shift my body in certain ways that are like surgery.
Right.
And I've contorted myself for society for so many years that I'm not willing to shift my voice in ways that don't feel right to me. Beautiful. So in the way that I present, I come across as like I confuse people, and my kids call me dad, and I love it. It's funny. It amuses me that they like. My son was talking to another dad yesterday at the playground, and he was like, my dad, blah, 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 she, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, okay, this is great.
So our first question is focusing on childhood. Your first memory of knowing that your assigned gender doesn't align with how you feel.
I love this question because I think when we're asked that, trans people, we're expected to like have one answer, right? And to like have this clarity around it. And I don't. What I know in retrospect and hindsight is that gender conditioning is relentless and starts at birth. And so, and as people, we don't know that's happening, right? As babies and infants and children, like we're just wide open and like, yay, life is fun. And then, but all of the, there's this insidious thing happening that's not nefarious. Like nobody's like saying, oh, you're wrong. It's just, especially when I grew up in the 80s mostly. Was born in the late 70s, 1976. So then I grew up in the 80s and then the early 90s. And trans issues were few and not seen largely. There are some exceptions, and actually those exceptions, I think maybe this is part of my answer, is like I knew when I at some point, and I don't remember how old I was, saw Renee Richards, who is she prefers the term transsexual. She's a transsexual tennis player who fought to play in Wimbledon in like the 70s. And at some point in the 80s, somehow I saw a picture of her. And I didn't know, like, that's the first trans person I ever saw. And I didn't know she was trans, but I knew she was different. And I knew, and then I found out, like, I read, and I was like, oh, that's a thing. And I had never known that before. And there are little milestones along the way where far before that, innately I knew I was a girl, but I didn't know explicitly. Like nobody told me that because nobody else knew. And I have very clear sort of like snapshot memories of times where I felt like a girl or times where I felt something was off. So one of those is like playing with my friends. One of them was a girl and just being really like interested in her and wanting to be around her. The other one is being at a May Day event, like the May Queen, the May pole and all of that. And I don't know how old I was, 5, 6, 7. I was little and I was cute enough to be pulled for the job of ring bearer. And so here I am, supposedly this little boy dressed in like this ridiculously like bright Easter type suit, holding this pillow with the ring on it for the May Queen. And it didn't feel right. I did enjoy it, kind of. I think I also fell asleep holding the ring, but I think that was because I was bored with what I was expected to do, but I was completely fascinated with the May Queen. And what I didn't know is I wanted to be her, and like when she approached and, me, then I was just like, wow, like really fascinated and enamored. And so, and that, this ties into some other interesting things that happened when I was much younger. And one is getting on to the school bus for the first time with my sister, who's older. And I just naturally sat with my sister because that's what made sense to me. Like, I'm going to sit with the person that I know and sit and ride the school bus with my sister. The whole school bus erupted with like, oh my God, there's a boy sitting on the girl's side. There's a boy sitting on the girl's side. And it was a chant. And I was just like, I didn't get it. Like, what is happening? And then so my sister understood before I did. And she was like, you're on the wrong side of the bus. You need to go sit over there with the boys. And I was like, what? Well, that's stupid. And so, but then I did. And then, of course, all the boys were like, ew, I don't want you to sit with me. And then I finally found a seat. But it was like, that's pretty traumatic for a 5-year-old or whatever to have this event that like centers you as sort of an object of ridicule because of something that you're just not aware of. Like, so for me, that gender distinction, I hadn't made it in my mind. Like it wasn't something that I was thinking about, especially not in that situation. And so that stands out, there's these, and so it's this trail of breadcrumbs for different things like this. And then I got to be about 30 years old and I was just like, oh no, that's, maybe this is stuff that I should be piecing together. And so it was a long process.
Yeah, I feel that it was a long process for me, and I think that there had been more um, visibility on it. I might have understood sooner. I might have known sooner. Um, I didn't understand my attraction to men was wanting to be a man.
Yep.
And so, do you feel like maybe if there was more visibility, you could have pieced it together sooner?
Well, yeah, I mean, sure. Like if I was growing up nowadays, if I was a kid nowadays, um, the culture is different and, people might ask me questions about like, and I would be socialized a little bit differently with the options. And so then, yeah, and then what does that look like? Does that mean that I would, who knows, I mean, that's just not my experience. And it's a fun thought experiment. And it's valuable too, because it helps put into perspective, like historically, the differences. And so, like, for me, the visibility thing, when I saw Renee Richards, going back to that, was just like, I was deeply attracted to this very fierce looking, kind of masculine looking woman. And that had to do with exactly what you said, not knowing this at the time, like wanting to be like her. In a very like particular sense of being a trans woman, um and I've had to parse that out too as I've come out and grapple with this idea of like, well, what is my attraction to women? Is that simply because I want to be one, or I am one, which is more accurate? um yes. Or am I physically, sexually, romantically attracted to women? Yes, it's both for me. Um, so I've gone from being sort of seen and classed as a heterosexual male, which I've never been, to being a gay woman, which I've always been and love being and celebrate. Um, and then I also have to integrate. I have to work really hard to see my masculinity in a way that is clear and not distorted and tainted by all the patriarchal bullshit values that we're all relentlessly slammed with. I call it a caricature and a distortion of true masculinity, which is true masculinity is, for me, my masculinity and femininity are quite similar. I don't like the concept of polarity. I think that's not true for everyone. I certainly don't think it's true for me. I don't really want to have anything to do with more beefy, macho, masculine people. And that's not to say that I can't have friends that are men or to have friends who are more masculine. It's more of like, it doesn't fit who I am. Like I struggle to integrate that into my beingness. And so, and also like I have a lot of, I call it trauma around being seen that way or expected to be that way, whether or not I was seen that way, because I actually was a pretty girly guy, you know? And I'm just using these sort of conventionally. Like I think it's important to stress like trans women are women, and I was never really a guy, but that's how I was perceived. And so, and that's how I perceive myself, because that's how I was perceived. Like it's so complicated. It is so complicated.
I feel that statement because being non-binary, I know people look at me and automatically see a woman. And um, when I do have short hair, I don't always have short hair. Most of my life, I've had short hair because I just feel it's more comfortable for me. But I've had long hair, and so, but when I have short hair, they'll look and they'll think automatically masculine lesbian. And so I will say, you know, um, to give people short answers, lesbian or this or that, because I don't have time to go into what I am and who my attraction is. I just know how the world perceives me. So I felt that statement. I really felt that um, because we are very aware how the world perceives us, and it's it doesn't always feel wonderful, and it's every day I feel like I come home and I've got to take that off.
Mhm.
Take that.
That's, yeah, that's terrible. And then, there was probably a time too, I don't know, I'm assuming you know, where you felt you weren't able to take that off. And that's what it felt like for me. It's like I've described it as being in an ill-fitting costume, but it's one that you like, that is kind of forcibly put onto you, and then you never take it off. So,
Forcibly put onto use. Yeah.
Ouch. It's definitely it's a hard one and it's hard to take off.
mm. Well, right. I mean, then again, this then goes into like my spirituality and how tied that is to this, because I've had to, and I mean, when perceived as male, I was a terribly depressed, felt incompetent, and uh, was very socially awkward in a lot of instances, except with friends that I was very comfortable around. Um, when in circles of men, it didn't, I didn't know what was happening. Like I didn't know how to communicate in that way, because because I'm not a man. And the way that my brain and emotional responses work are, when compared to what I see as the more linear and rational and objective masculine way of perceiving, like I'm a mess, and I'm a beautiful, colorful mess. And I erupt in laughter and giggles, and some of the things that are, many of the things that were being talked about in the masculine circles, that I would, like, I would sit in this gaming group because I like to play games for hours, and these men would be talking, and I would just be so bored, because I didn't know how to connect with that. the way that they communicated was very directional, very like, I know this thing. What do you know? And I was thinking to myself, or like, no, not even thinking, because not really knowing how to express it, but feeling in my body, feeling in my emotions. Like, I don't know much of anything, and I'm okay with that. Like, I actually enjoy the novelty and the uncertainty of um, the more unpredictable and chaotic aspects of life. But I'd be happy to talk about that with you, you know, like, and just like a total miss. So I don't know. I went off on a tangent there.
No, I think it was a great tangent because I don't think a lot of people realize that, and I think it just brings it to light even more. So I think it was a great tangent. Um, so going off of that, you play video games. Is there anything that you wanted to do when you were younger, um, that your parents wouldn't let you do because it was too girly, or it just it didn't fit who they wanted you to be? Did you have any problems um, like that as a child?
No, I mean, not really, not that I'm aware of, and not that, you know, I've thought about that a lot. Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's enough like ambiguity in who I am and non-binariness that people could see what they thought they were supposed to see. I, as a child, I loved Star Wars, and you know that's not a boy or girl thing, but I also really like loved kind of dressing up as Han Solo, and like I had, or like, you know, imagining myself as that, as a character like that. And I wore cowboy boots, like, you know, and you know, cowgirls wear those boots too. But for me, it was just like, yeah, these are cool boots, and they were very like intricate too. Like I remember the patterns on them, and that's sort of the thing that attracted me to them was like, wow, because I'm an artist and like I like complexity. I like line work. And so seeing that, I was like, yeah, man, I can wear that. So like I think the biggest thing for me, um, and it does reach back into childhood, but it became exceptionally or exponentially pronounced over time is like clothing. Oh my God. I can't with the man clothes. And you know that very much is like, yeah, like a physical expression of this ill-fitting costume I was talking about. Like my mom would always buy me clothes for Christmas, like even as an adult. And she'd ask me too, she'd be like, you know, what kind of clothes, do you need some jeans? And I'm like, I guess. And then I became like, as I became more self-aware, it was just kind of like, I really don't want my mom buying me clothes for Christmas. But I couldn't tell her, like, you and your clothes, you know, like I'm not wearing that. And so then I would just like shove this stuff into the closet, or I'd try to wear it. And I was like, I just can't. What is this? And so then, you know, that was a process of me integrating. And that was a long process of me coming out to myself and coming to terms with being trans. It's like, what can I wear that's not going to scream like, you know, because it took me a long time to really understand my style and like, and to be confident enough to like own that. So what can I wear that's like kind of, yeah, in that in between space that like I would go shop at. I don't know if you're familiar with the store H&M, but I would go shop there, and because it just, I didn't know much about it, but I just felt this vibe like, okay, yeah, no, we're, you know, all the genders, you know, just you can come and do what you want and find what you want. And then I would find these clothes that were sort of in between, like they'd be in the men's section, but they were feminine, and they had like a seam in the back or something, and it was like, oh wait, so, and then I began to identify these things of like, well, that's a women's clothes things, and like buttons on the different sides, just like, well, I don't understand why we have to do it this way, but I like it. Like, okay, that gives me an identifier. And so, yeah, back to your question, was there anything that I wanted to do as a kid that I wasn't really allowed to do? Clothes. And also, like, I remember, yeah, having sort of playing with girls in the neighborhood. And for some reason, I haven't quite remembered all of this because it's kind of blacked out, like that. Those hangouts became less and less, and so I don't know, like, if that triggered something in the parents, and maybe not just mine, but other kids' parents are like, this boy is kind of weird, like, he's enjoying this a little too much. And so then I would go and play with boys, and again, even when I was younger, like the same thing, like I'd be wanting to talk about stuff that's going on in my family and like complex issues. Like I had a cousin who had a drug problem when I was like 7 or 8, and I was trying to understand this, and I was like, guys, can we talk about my cousin who has drug problems? Do you guys like anybody have this? And to me, that's just a human thing. That's like a connection thing. But these sweet boys were like, no, no, I don't have anything like that. And then like go back to throwing the ball around. And I was like, but wait, there's more. And so that was a big piece. Yeah. It's funny too, like I did gymnastics as a teenager, and that was not a that was a very gendered thing. And I was of course doing like the boy gymnastics, and I remember standing and waiting to get on the pommel horse or something, and like standing in such a way that this kid behind me, my friend, was like, why are you standing like a girl? I just kind of had my weight shifted to one hip, and I was like, had to straighten up. I was like, I don't really know I'm doing that. And there's like also kind of violating, like, why are you calling me out for that? Because that's just, I honestly, you want to know why? Because I like to stand like that. Like that feels good and cute, and like it's natural. So
Would you say that, so you talked about shopping, were there any, it sounds like the groups that you hung out with, from your sister on the bus to the friends and your gymnastics friends, sort of limited, eventually your interactions with them. Your parents tried to, buy you certain clothes in certain ways. Did they provide you with, traditionally boy clothes or boy toys and girl toys? Did you have brothers and sisters that you could, you had a sister.
mhm.
Yeah, like around what was accessible to you and what your parents encouraged you to do for your entertainment, toy wise and
Yeah,
activity wise. They let you go to gymnastics.
right.
It was pretty cool. Were they pretty open with it, or?
Well, I mean, and again, like the gymnastics thing, like that was a strength training thing. That was it was like, there were the girls team and the boys team, and so that was a very gendered thing. um and yeah, like maybe in retrospect, like it seems a bit more feminine, like just in general, but gymnastics will build a very masculine body. Like that is one, to me, I think that's one of the most intense strength trainings there is. um So, but to answer your question, did my parents or even society like shepherd me in a direction? Well, yeah. Was it malicious? No. Um, and, you know, I think I'm queer enough that I could kind of, it, it definitely hurt me. It definitely damaged me and like kept me from expressing fully my gender. And it actually, I'm certain that it isolated me and alienated me and had me um, dive into coping mechanisms that were not healthy, like ultimately are not that healthy. And yet, like, because I didn't really want to hang out with a lot of boys, I went into my imagination. Um, and that was and is rich enough for me to spend a lot of time there and be happy doing that. As far as, the clothing and the options there or the different toys, there's some fun stories around that. Like my mom is, and this is interesting, she's a very outspoken, like no bullshit, um, and very practical person. Um, and she and I are quite opposite in a lot of ways. I'm not practical at all. And that's funny. And it's also like just my reality. I have some executive functioning issues. Um, so, but yeah, she would kind of take me clothes shopping, and then I would pick out these really loud shirts. Like I remember being in 5th grade, first day of school, like I had, when it was the 80s, mind you, like granted, like everybody was kind of embracing this neon chaos. And so I was like, that, I want that shirt. And it was just like a black shirt, but not, it's like every color imaginable like splattered onto it and it was geometric patterns. And I was like, that's awesome. And then she's like, well, what about this hat? And so then I took this hat, which was like, I don't know what you call those. It's kind of like a baseball hat, but then the top of it folds over and it like snaps. And so it's kind of like, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's cool too. And for some reason I could wear the hat to school. And so, or at least maybe like on the way to school. So I had the hat, it's a really loud shirt. And I got into 5th grade and I was just like, this shirt is awesome. Like just like really kind of feeling like good. Yeah, or at least like comfortable. But then like over time looking around and being like, this is unusual. Like this is unusual for me to be like this into color, and into texture. And so with clothing, like, I joke and say I can't with the man clothes, but I really can't because the fabric is rough. It's not comfortable. Um, it's a bit distressing for my skin. And then the straightness is like, I can't handle the straightness. Like the pants, they're just so yeah. And
So
yeah,
did your changing tastes in clothing, I mean, you're talking grade 5, that's pretty young, they kind of came from yourself as you evolved? Was there a moment when you were like, that's it, I'm trans, I'm gonna go change my wardrobe and go shopping for a particular kind of clothing? Or was it like just a natural evolution, like I just can't with the man clothes, let's go with, it's the 80s, everybody's androgynous, got the big shoulder pads,
no,
Duran
no.
Duran, Boy George, Rocket? I'm also a
But it
child of the
wasn't that
80s.
at all, because I grew up in South Carolina. And so there was like, you know, like, okay, it was fine for the kids to watch Boy George videos and like Madonna and like all of that. But you better dress right, especially for church, you know, and like, and so it wasn't an option. And, but, you know, but with my family, within my family, it was kind of just like whatever. So, but then I began to self-censor some. And so by the time I got to high school, you know, I I say I began to self-censor, but I also like, I'm a pretty hardcore rebel in a lot of ways. And so then I couldn't like, I definitely couldn't do like, so yeah, like the preppy look with like the khakis and the braided belt. That was, and this is just my school, you know, like, and Sabagos. I don't know if anybody remembers these shoes that were, at least in Greenville, South Carolina, like these were just like a status kind of thing. Oh, you're wearing your Sabagos, you know. Like, I want to wear the Chuck Taylors and the ripped jeans, and you know, the more ripped the better, and the older and the more like naturally worn. Because before anybody actually bought jeans that were ripped, you know, you just got the jeans and then you wore them until it's like started to fall apart, and that was awesome. And then like getting into like alternative music and wearing that merch, you know, before anybody really called it merch, it was just like wearing the shirt and going to the concert. Anyway, so I always found a way to sort of like, and this is just innate and natural. It wasn't really something that I contrived to do or consciously thought about. Just push, you know, like push away the stuff that didn't fit. But then I wasn't thinking about gender either. I was more thinking about like social stuff, and critically thinking also about like social issues in high school, and which is what, you know, eventually brought me more awareness of the gender spectrum and transness. um but I do want to real quickly, and I know I'm talking a lot, but to go back, you asked about toys and like certain things that I might want to play with, and I recall this not infrequently with great amusement. And it's that like my family, you know, in the 80s, we would go to the mall on like a Friday night and everybody would shop. And having an older sister, um, and we were still kind of young at that point, and so that there was a store called, I think it was originally called Hello Kitty, but then it was called like Sanrio Surprises. And it just had all of like the glittery things and like the little cute eraser tops and bears and lots of candy. And I loved that store. And so I would go in there with my sister, just like not even thinking that it was weird that a boy would, and it's not that a boy would want to do that, boy. Um, and so I would always like get little treasures from there, and they'd just be like these glittery, plasticky, like gummy things. And I don't know, like I think I was kind of oblivious. And again, this is like the bus thing, like just oblivious to the pervasiveness of the gender binary, and also not oblivious and like really on a visceral physical level, like being assaulted by it. And so then I did, like at an unconscious level, like integrate society's biases, which disintegrated my own natural expression and resulted in a severe dissociation of my social persona and mind from my body. And so then again, getting back into spirituality, like the spirituality of my transness is embodying physically who I am as a soul, spirit, as an emotional human being. And that's beautiful. Like I own that fully because it's fan-fucking-tastic.
I love so with clothing, and you you, you kind of rode the lines but kept it um within the aspect because of your where you lived and your upbringing. Um were some of the when you were able to go crazy in the clothing store, was there a time in the beginning maybe where you're just like, I'm gonna pick the most glitteriest thing, or I'm gonna pick the most feminine thing I could find, while you're still trying to find your style and do that? Or were you always drawn more towards comfort and artsy and self-expression? How did that look for you?
Well, I mean, I think it's also important to point out, because I'm not sure that we're all aware of this, like I've just recently transitioned, like within the past couple of years. In 2019, I began hormone replacement therapy. And so this isn't like something that I had a lot of comfort with. And so then asking me about like when I went shopping, well, that looked like me going with my wife to Goodwill early in our relationship, when we were both like kind of looking at this like, okay, so like there's some kind of gender thing here. What is that exactly? And I would like kind of shyly like hover around women's clothes, and then I might I, I might, if I was feeling very bold, like try them on, or I might just like, be hovering with my wife nearby and show her a belt, be like, hey. And then, sort of like in code, like, oh, I like this. And then she would buy this stuff. Um, and I would go try it on. And like, she bought me a skirt for Valentine's Day one year. And that was over a decade ago. And I still have that skirt. And I love it, but I've worn holes in it, so I don't wear it much. Um, and my style is expansive. Like what feels good to me is, yeah, glittery and sparkly in some instances, and also like deeply earthen and green and brown, and also kind of punk rock gothy, like all black and silver. And so I just enjoy playing with that. I think maybe my earliest experience with, or my earliest experience with clothing, because I do have some like uncertain memories of like spending time in my mother's closet, just like in the clothes, like not wearing them, but just like, and I don't think I make those up. Like, but that's the thing, because it's so cloudy, because I was so dissociated for a long time. Um, but anyway, so one of my first experiences, like recognizing, okay, this is a real thing. Like I had made some friends at a camp when I was a teenager. And of course, we all lived in different locations, but we, there were three of us, and we felt so connected after that couple of weeks that we set up a time to come visit at one of these girls' houses. And so we were all girls. One of us didn't really know that at the time. And being there with them, they decided one night that it would be fun if they dressed me in like a skirt and a blouse. And one of them, brought this up to me, like, what do you think about that? And I was like, yeah, more like feeling in myself, like, hell yeah. And then having that experience of being in those clothes, just being like melty, like,
that feeling of this is what I've been missing.
Gender euphoria, I mean, that may have been my first taste of that. And that's something that's worth talking about a little bit is, I think a lot of people are aware of the phenomenon of gender dysphoria. And that can look like a lot of things, and it's painful, and it can be understood by the person experiencing it at like a pretty comprehensive level or not. And I think a lot of what's most painful about gender dysphoria is like not really knowing that's happening. But then the flip side of that is obviously so much better. Gender euphoria, it's like it's a breath of fresh air, but it's also like stepping into the sunlight at the same time, coming out of a stuffy closet, breathing deeply, and like just having a full body laugh, like, oh my God, yes.
How would you explain to, or how would you describe your experience with being both non-binary and trans? My understanding is that they're on a spectrum. And what's that like for you? When did you first realize that you were non-binary? How did that morph into, or how did that evolve into realizing that you liked certain textures and styles and fashion choices, and at what point did you know that you were a woman and that you wanted to transition? And like, how do all of those pieces fit together? I know they're related, but help me understand that.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot there. Trying to think about how to approach this. So I think as I became aware of gender diversity, I was fortunate enough for like one of the first people I read who was doing work around gender as a trans person. So embodied work around gender, but also like writing about it and offering tools to people, is a woman named Kate Bornstein. And I bought a book of hers, and this must have been roughly 15 years ago. And that was the time when I was like really beginning to engage with this and consciously like understanding. Before, it had been something that I felt but didn't know, or there would be moments where I thought I had an idea, and then I would entertain these sort of fantasies about being a girl. And I would see myself in my friends who were girls. And so largely too, like I have, especially as a teenager, like I had a diverse group of friends. Well, kind of. We were all white, suburban bred people. But as far as like being in South Carolina and being a little bit different, like we were all pretty diverse. And I had friends that are boys, never had a boyfriend, never really want one. That's beside the point. Friends that are boys and friends that are girls. and the the people that I really connected to were on both sides, but in different ways. And the people that I connected to that were boys were also like struggling with some serious shit, like abuse in their family. Some of this stuff I didn't know at the time, and I wouldn't know for years later. And so we were all kind of like traumatized, and but looking for this closeness. Um, and I've gotten totally away from your question. What was your question?
Just it was how would you help someone like me understand how being non-binary and knowing that you're a woman and then and trans, how are they related? What's your experience with them?
Mhm.
And how would you help someone understand what that means to you in your experience?
Okay. Yeah, that is such a great question. I mean, and it's deep, and I think that's why I kind of went down that rabbit hole for a minute. I was talking about this with a friend of mine recently, actually, who's dealing with some gender um, uncertainty, or was, and that we were talking about like non-binary, and when I mentioned to them that, you know, they know me as a trans woman, but when I mentioned like, well, I'm both, I'm a non-binary trans woman, and they were like, okay, that just opened up a whole new vista. Like, what's that, you know? And it's exciting. Like, okay, well, that's a thing. I'm like, well, why shouldn't it be? You know, I mean, if I feel that that's who I am, then that's who I am. And if I refuse to play gender games in the society, and it cuts both ways, like that's the thing. Again, like I'm not going to shift my voice, and so I've had to become increasingly more comfortable with just owning that and being fine, like in the grocery store, and just talking to my children and other people in the cashier without worrying about what other people think or what this is going to sound like. And um, my transness and my non-binariness, it's simply the spectrum, and it's me understanding my particular place within it, like on it, and how that encompasses different aspects, binary polar aspects of masculine and feminine. And so if you simply see me out and I'm not talking, you see a woman, and I'm so grateful for that. Like that's because that's who I am. I'm a woman, and I want to be seen as one, and I want to be treated as such. And I don't really care for being called ma'am or sir, but if you're gonna call me one, you better fucking call me ma'am, because I will be hurt if you call me sir. And and that's real, and that's something that I really struggled with for a long time as somebody who is perceived as male and being paid respect by being called sir, and just being like like I knew it didn't feel right. um so I think as I spent a lot of time processing before I was ready to make the actual transition, which includes hormone replacement therapy and coming out. And so I've had a lot of safety in my relationship with my wife, and a lot of time and space to process. And so that did look like me trying on different clothes and playing with makeup, and eventually, yeah, starting to buy wigs, because unfortunately I had beautiful hair as a child and a teenager, and I would wear it long. And then in my 20s, the devil that is testosterone began to ravage my hairline and create a bald spot. And so I'm constantly working now to like find ways to heal that and get what hair I can back in a society that is telling me scientifically like that's not possible. Like medically, this is not, it's not going to happen. And I just kind of refuse to believe that, because I believe that our beliefs shape who we are and what we experience. And so I know that there are natural remedies that do have some effect. Now, what that looks like eventually, will I ever feel comfortable? Because I can walk around my house and just have my long hair, like my actual long hair, and be okay. But I'm not going to go out that way, because it's not going to clearly, people aren't going to see me clearly. They will, and that's funny. Like, that's an odd concept for people to understand. Like, well, that doesn't make sense. If she goes out how she is, not naturally, we'll see her how she is. And like, but that's the whole crux of the trans experience, right? Like, you won't, because you're gonna see me within a binary system. So it's also a non-binary experience. Like, you're gonna see me within a binary system that is not actually accurate. And
I feel your description in the answer of this non-binary spectrum, which is gender being on a spectrum, with masculinity and femininity and non-binary being somewhere in the middle, shifting, right?
or even outside of all of that. I like to think of it not as, and I use the word spectrum, but rather, because spectrum denotes polarity, that there's an end. It might be really far apart, but I find it more helpful to think of this as a sphere.
Okay,
right?
yes. Yeah, not a checkbox,
but it's also an ever expanding sphere, where these qualities eventually, just like if you were to travel around the globe, you come back to where you started. Well, so the qualities actually meet at some point, and we've just simply we've been subjected to, we haven't made this, we've been subjected to social distinctions of either or. And we all are operating within that, and honestly, like, I'm okay with that. Like, I'm happy to deal with that, as long as you see me on the closer to the pole that you're seeing things through. So I need people to see me as a woman, which is why I wear a wig, and which is why I often wear makeup. It's not because, well, no, it is. It's because I really love to play with makeup, but it's also because I am going to be more comfortable out if you're not seeing my beard stubble. Like, and I can shave that multiple times a day and cover it with foundation, and I'll be okay. And so again, like, I'm not about to go out and get electrolysis. I'm not saying that that's not okay for anyone, but I've talked to friends who are getting electrolysis, and they tell me it is horribly painful. And again, it's just like, why would I do that to myself? I've suffered enough. I'm not going to physically violate myself. I mean, and that's just my perspective. And any trans woman or woman who wants to undergo electrolysis and believes that it's worth it, and that they are willing to deal with the pain and all of the complex, like, procedures that have to, and the financial cost, wow, you know, like I have a lot of respect for you, and I would do it too if it didn't hurt as bad. And
I
if it didn't break me.
I feel like you have a better understanding of what we call SOGI, so sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, than most of us. I feel like there are lots of cultures that knew intuitively that there were two spirits. That there was a TikTok I watched, and she listed about 10 different cultures.
Oh, it's way
Then
more than that.
and then the Europeans came and they applied their binary on everyone. They took away their language, culture, religion, soji. And so if I'm trying to make sense of it with my and I'm rejecting the binary, and I'm trying and I'm looking up to you, who I feel has a much better understanding of the globality and the wholeness of this whole thing. If I look at being non-binary as a gender identity, and a trans as being a gender expression and also related to gender identity,
Mm-hmm.
and then sexual orientation as being a woman who loves woman, or lesbian, whatever, like there's different words you can use for that. Would I be close to understanding your experience?
Yeah and no. You know, I mean, nobody's going to understand it the way that I do.
Yeah.
And the closer you are to me, then the more clearly you'll understand who I am. Am I two-spirit? Well, I don't think of myself that way, and yet I do. Like, if I'm going to I really love playing with language and like illustrating the absurdity of certainty. And so it depends on how we're looking at any of this. And we're all looking at it through a cultural lens. And yes, I do have like a very visceral and embodied understanding of this because it's my life. And it's in a very deep way the work that I'm here to do and to advocate for myself, but also for every being that is different and multifaceted within a very reductionist paradigm. And so I'm one spirit. I'm just gonna claim that. Like, yes, we can talk about me, and I can see myself as being two spirit, as having masculine and feminine. But I love that my masculine is this innocent and angry young man who is ripe with grief for all of the injustices in the world. And I love that my feminine is this fully expressive, badass bitch who does not care what society thinks. And my job now for my life's work, you know, at least this aspect of it, is to weave those two together and to reconcile them, because there are stark differences in the way that these two spirits experience the world. And I've noticed this week. I've been doing some really intentional work with my masculine, and that's that I keep my masculine at a distance, or especially since like beginning transition, because society required me to embrace a masculinity that is false and not who I am. And I had to push that away. But in doing so, then I've revealed like my true masculinity as this described myself recently as part Dionysus or Dionysus, part Bodhisattva, and part Sappho. So like I have this wild, erotic, and rebellious masculine. And then I have this beautiful, soft, graceful, artistic feminine. And I'm a marriage of both of them. And that marriage is in service to expanding love for humanity and showing like it's okay to be who you are. I don't care. You're gay, yeah, me too.
Beautifully said. Do you going back just a little, uh, you have mentioned your wife a few times, and um, I love that you guys stuck through this period together of figuring out all of this together. Um, I would like to look into that a little. She bought you a skirt, which just melted my heart because I finally met somebody who has really just supported me along my journey, and having that support, it was like jaw dropping for me. Um, how was that for you when you realize I don't fit this box, and you're also married, and so you have to navigate that, and that could be a potentially scary situation. um I don't know how much you expressed before you got married, and then now, so how did that look, and how did that work, and um how did you guys navigate that whole situation?
Awkwardly and painfully and honestly. And so this all began for us. I'm not quite sure on the timeline. I think she feels like it's a little bit um, later than I do that we had the conversation, but to me it feels like pretty soon after we got together. And I was just like, I don't even know why I started talking about this, but I was like, I feel more like a girl than I do a boy. And I feel like more of a woman than man. And we were just lying in bed and she was like, okay. And so then like we started talking about this and she's my partner. Like she's my I couldn't be who I am exactly without her and our relationship because yes, it's so woven into my process of discovery. And so we had that conversation and then we had other ones and she was so like wanting to understand and open to my uncertainty and confusion. And we saw each other clearly enough, that she knew that there was part of me that was in pain. And and then this played out over 10 years. So when we got married, it was supposedly as a man and a woman. And um then but we were already having these conversations. We just weren't sharing them with anybody. And it took me so long to like, and this is because of misogyny and because of transphobia, or what Julia Serrano calls transmisogyny, is like, um, yeah, so this could really fuck up my life if I own this, right? And it could also destroy my marriage. Like, and I think I knew that, and we both did, but I knew that if I was going to have a serious committed relationship, and it was clear to me at that time that this relationship that I was getting into with Jennifer was of such a potential depth that I needed to let her know. Uh, for her sake and for mine, because if I go into this relationship and I'm not creating, and again, this is like not totally conscious at the time, it's like I'm feeling my way forward with this. And I'm not creating the environment or, knowing that this is a safe thing to explore here in this relationship, then uh, I I'm limits like I'm just that's not gonna work. Let's just put it that way. And so, but it's scary and it's awkward and it's challenging to talk about this in a partnership because you're not only dealing with gender, you're dealing with sexuality. And, eventually, after I began to transition and she saw who more clearly who I am, which she's always known, um, she's articulated to me like, well, it was always your feminine qualities that I was attracted to, or, at least I have always been attracted to those qualities, not to say that she's not attracted to other qualities too. And also like she's told me, and I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, but that she was always attracted to the girly guys, the men that were more feminine, the longer hair, and so like that is it's been a symbiotic relationship for a co-discovery of my gender, but also our equally both of our sexualities. Okay, so like I'm a lesbian and she identifies as pansexual out of sort of, not out of necessity, but out of like, and out of this conversation that went on for 13 years, that's an awareness that she's come to. So the last thing I'll say is that how did I get to this point of like, coming out and showing up daily as I am. I said it was painful and awkward. It was horribly painful. And I lived for a long time as a very broken person and a shadow of who I truly am. And part of our journey together, the two of us, because I think that equally, like I had to experience this and she also had to know it and see it, is like I struggled with depression from the time I was 15, like was when I really started seeing, my parents started sending me to therapists and stuff, not because I was a troublesome child, but because I was sad and they could see that. And I went through many different therapeutic experiences and medications, and even had something called, I'm gonna blank on this right now. Basically, I went to a clinic where they stimulated my brain with electromagnetic waves. It was like something like a transcranial magnetic therapy or something. So I'd sit in this chair for like half an hour, and it would just, but I was so depressed at that point that this was like what we thought might actually shift something. And maybe it contributed, but it didn't feel like it at the time. I just felt like I was, again, just still going through the motions and trying this thing. And I was always just so depressed. And then, but then once I like, and I knew by then, I knew I was trans. Like I had come out to my parents as trans. We both, we had sat down with my parents and talked about that. And so that happened like 2017 or something. And then things got a little complicated and I pulled away from my knowing of that. And then I got really intensely depressed, so badly that I slept for 16 to 20 hours a day for months. And I hate that I had to have that experience, but whatever, I had to have that experience and I had to feel that to understand, like, obviously I'm not living, this is just me avoiding life. And so I had a decision to make, and it wasn't a choice of whether I'm transgender or not, and it wasn't a choice of whether I'm a lesbian or not. It was a choice of, am I going to continue to exist in this state of basically living death for the rest of my life and just be resigned to this as I've been? Or am I going to do something about it and live my life? And so at that point, it's not even a choice, it's like, well, clearly I'm not going anywhere. So I'm just either living this terrible, hellish existence or trying something new. So let's try the new thing. And God, I'm glad I did, because I've met people and made friendships and community that I had never imagined that I would. And I've showed up for myself and others as a person that I never could have imagined. And so, I mean, it's transfigurative, like, and it's who I've always been, but at a very deep level. But then this suppression, cultural, societal, and then like internalized, so personal suppression of who I am. I mean, it's hard to go through life like not knowing yourself and trying to show up in the world with all of its complications and requirements. I don't think people should do that. Like, that's not, it's not happening. So
Wow, thank you for that. That was very reflective and very self-aware, and not an easy journey. And sounds like it took hitting rock bottom to make that decision to show up authentically, as we hear, so often said, versus just existing, living versus existing. And yeah, I'm so glad you're here with us and authentically you. I'm in awe that you have known, that you all along have known your place, you've understood yourself, and you've just rejected society trying to apply constructs on you, your life, your understanding, your thoughts, your feelings, your expressions that didn't make sense to you. And you don't, you've chosen some labels that are helpful to other people to understand or for you to find community, but you don't seem to me to be like, okay, I have, these 10 labels defining me. You're just like, I'm showing up, I'm me, I'm Charlotte, here's who I am. Voila. I love that.
Well, thank you.
I wish I had that strength too. So,
well, I was thinking as you were talking, like, you said that I always knew and did this sort of uh, empowered response, but it wasn't like that. I didn't know, not on a conscious level. And yes, what you say is true. My body knew, and my emotions knew. But it took a long time to understand that consciously and to kind of acquire an intellectual framework to talk about it. And I think that's really important. Like, I do kind of eschew labels, and yet I'm so grateful for them. And I am happy to be a trans woman. I'm happy to be queer. I'm happy to be a lesbian. I'm happy to own these labels and to be described in that way because they help me see myself more clearly. And yeah, like a lot of my questing was misplaced, and then so I was doing things from a place of sorrow, despair, and anger, and just pushing and lashing out against stuff. But then once I really kind of began to understand where that anger and that sorrow was rooted, it became a very empowering thing. Like, and then yeah, it kind of all came into perspective. Like, oh, I have been doing this work. I just didn't know I was doing it.
That part I really resonates with me as also a late bloomer, also comp het, also just living, just going through the motions of what was expected and not really questioning what else was possible. Like, here's some vanilla ice cream. Everybody eats vanilla ice cream. Oh, is there such a thing as chocolate ice cream? I've never seen chocolate ice cream until I hit 50. Wow. Where you been all my life? The chocolate ice cream, right? Yeah, I get that part. Oh, I love talking, or I love listening to you talk. You've really covered the childhood part well, and I think I have an understanding of how you got from there to here. So for the now part, it's just how do you feel about you being you? Do you have any regrets? And then and what was the hardest part of your journey? Those we could bundle together. Then there's some other questions about what you would say to other people, which I'll introduce after maybe you have a chance to talk about what that feels like to be you and what was the hardest part about it, and if you have any regrets or just happiness.
Well, I don't have regrets. I mean, if I were to look and see like what might I regret, it would be that it took so long, but okay. I mean, at least it's not still going on, and that I've been able to bloom and be who I am in the world without pretense. Yeah, how do I feel about who I am and how I show up? I don't know, this sounds funny, but I'm in love with myself. Like, it's wonderful to see who I am and to have the experience of like waking up in the morning and being like, fuck yes, another day, instead of, oh my God. And to look in the mirror and be like, all right, I like what I see. I like who I am, instead of wanting to look away. And I mean, that's marvelous. And I am, so it's hard to really kind of talk about this without acknowledging that like there's a greater force that moves through me that's not simply like, and so we get kind of like spiritual, like, okay, you know, I had to face a lot of darkness and shadows. And it turns out like I'm pretty good at that. And I did a lot of that work on my own or with a very small team of people, mostly my life. And it's like, I said I'm an artist. And so like, I feel like I, I see everything and I experience my work as process and that I just enjoy creating things. And so it seems like from a larger spiritual perspective, like my human life has been an act of creation and dealing with lots of materials and sifting through and getting rid of the stuff that doesn't work until it's like really focused, um, in order to create myself, um, in a way that feels and is natural. So I'm really excited by that because I feel like, yes, I have put a lot of work into that. And now I get to show up as who I am and also facilitate transformational processes with others. Not that I'm telling people what they need to do, but just simply like showing up and holding space for people that are going through some kind of transition. And it doesn't have to be a gender transition, and it doesn't have to do it necessarily with sexuality. Just like there's a lot of stuff that we all need to deal with, and there's a lot of deeply painful experiences that we have as a collective human species. And to just like know that I've struggled with that a lot myself makes me feel confident that I show up for others in a way that creates a safe space for them also to express those things, to grieve, to rage. And then through my own process of self-discovery, I have kind of this fun and wacky tool set of creative techniques that and it's a mess. I probably need to organize it, but if somebody's needing somebody to sit with them and talk with, like I can do that. And I can also give you a paintbrush, and I can also give you a journal and a pen and give you prompts. And my intention there is for people to do that, whatever deep work looks like for them, and to like go ahead and shepherd that child that was so, whether intentionally or not, neglected and unseen and told, not to do it that way. Like allow that person to have what they need and to discover freely like how they are.
Um, I don't know if you, okay, like I'm going to edit this question out, but let me ask it. So you're talking about your current work and is it, do, do you have a business or that you want to talk about as part of your work? It sounds sort of like a life coach. Did you want to maybe do a plug or like just talk about that part or something like that?
I mean, sure. and it'll help me kind of like conceptualize it too, because I'm always refining this. And yeah, I mean, I do describe myself as a creative embodiment coach, but I'm trying to find a more accurate way to represent what I do. And it's like really important to have the disclaimer that I'm not a therapist, that although I might describe myself as a healer, what I mean is that I work constantly to heal myself. And because I do that, then I have tools that I can offer other people to do that same work for themselves. And so I'm not a mechanic. Like, I'm not here to fix anyone. I'm actually here to do the opposite. I'm here to show y'all that it's safe to love yourself and to come forward and joyfully embrace life. And, you know, and it doesn't feel safe. It often does not feel safe. And so people need an explicit safe space, a sacred container where they can go and have these experiences. And lucky for me, like, that's who I get to be. And I get to create these containers and craft these experiences for people. I get to call out for people in my community to come out and dance at the park, and I get to facilitate ecstatic dance, and that's a lot of fun, you know. And so I have a website, and it still needs work. And I'm not a very good business person, but I am a good me. And so I show up as my website is www.iamcharlottetara.com. I've also recently launched my Patreon. Maybe we could share links or something so I don't have to like spell it all out. But that's where I share a lot of my own processes. And so I write and I share that through social media, but less so now because I'm trying to really focus on my own transformative processes and not so much like do that always in a more publicized sort of way. So then I'm narrowing what I offer through social media, but I do have an Instagram. It's also I am Charlotte Tara. And I will link there, like I will share poetry or pieces of poetry, my artwork, thoughts, essays, chunks of essays. And then if it's just an excerpt, then I always mention, my Patreon where people can go and for a fee of $13 a month have unlimited access to my writings. And then there are other tiers as well that I haven't built up to yet, but I intend to do, that have to do with more creative embodiment and videos and creating meditations, and then also some of my more long-term projects, like I'm stepping into creating coloring books and tarot decks, oracle decks. And so that's something that's also that I intend to share through Patreon. But right now I'm just kind of calling in my people and my audience.
You're describing creating a safe space for people to unmask and get messy and figure themselves out using similar processes and techniques to what has helped you. I'm aware of the mental toll that it takes to mask, to hide your true identity when you're on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, trans spectrum, autism spectrum. Can you speak to masking and what your experience with that has been like?
Oh, can I? Yes, I can. It's exhausting and draining. For me, it got to the point where, like I said, I shut down. And so I just totally dissociated and disengaged from life, and would rather force myself to sleep for up to 20 hours a day and just do the bare minimum. And I had kids, and I was like, and so that was another part of this, was like, I can't do this to my family. But masking is completely exhausting. And for me, I I don't know that and this is something that I'm actually just kind of working with right now, but I don't know that I would be on the autistic spectrum, but I certainly empathize with as some of what I understand that experience to be like. I am extremely sensitive and empathic, and so what I experience at times is loud noises really mess me up, especially if I'm deeply relaxed and a door slams or somebody yells. And like I physically feel that. Like I physically feel it in my nerves. Um, so that's part of my, I wouldn't call that masking, I call that coping, is like and again, like creating a safe space, creating a quiet, or at least like curated space where I'm in control of the sounds, and I am in control of the visuals, and like, or just immersed in nature. And so those are like strategies that I have discovered for myself and that may work for others. But the masking, before I transitioned, I, I masked for decades, and without even knowing that's what I was doing. And it was just simply trying to survive and trying to navigate in a world that saw me as someone that I'm not, as a polar opposite gender wise of who I am. And it was very difficult for me to have any kind of lucrative work to fit into any sort of career trajectory. And I ended up doing a lot of different jobs and a lot of not real hard physical labor, but a lot of like service work and on my feet. And so that there's like this physical exhaustion, but also, yeah, the mental exhaustion of, this is another piece of the where I feel like I relate to the autism spectrum, is because of the gender conditioning and the masking that I didn't know I was doing. Social interactions for a very long time were absolutely exhausting and disturbing for me. And like I described when I was talking about being in male social circles, like just not understanding and having to like, how have I described this before? It's almost like a process of translation was happening that I didn't know. Like I was decoding the masculine social ways and trying to interpret and understand. And then I came up with this very unconscious framework of like what it looked like to be and act as a man. And so then that's where gender became performative for me, which I think really is important to stress. Like, I'm not performing my gender now. I think that we all have an innate and authentic gender. It's just that for some of us, or maybe more of us than would like to admit, it doesn't look like male or female. And because it's richer than that. And so when we feel like we have to be one of those two, that's when gender becomes performative, and we're looking for clues from, as ridiculous sources as pop culture, and also just like other people. We're looking for our cues and our models of how to be from others, and that's not how you do anything in life. It has to be sourced from within.
Yeah. Those are wise words for sure. The last couple of questions that we have are around others. And so what would you say to those who say that you're not a real woman, or who say that you're choosing to be trans, or you're choosing to be lesbian, or you're choosing any of the labels that you would apply to yourself? Keep it nice-ish.
Nice. I think I could respond to that in a lot of different ways. And I think probably the most honest response I have right now is like, it's complicated. People perceive the world in the ways that they perceive the world. And unfortunately, many of us, all of us at some level, have been taught to perceive the world in ways that aren't necessarily true. And so I used to engage in confrontational conversations about a variety of things that I was passionate about, but it's not worth it. I would end up feeling so angry and so just jacked up on like adrenaline and stuff that I don't need like coursing through my body. That's not healthy. And so when confronted now with something like that, where somebody's bold enough to say to my face, you're not who you say you are. You're not a woman. You're a man. Like, I've never experienced that directly. I've experienced it a couple of times on social media. And it hurts. Like, but and I can respond to it in a variety of ways. But my choice now is just to like disengage from that conversation, because it doesn't matter what that person thinks and their perception. That's simply, I think we've all probably heard this, hopefully, is like what they are saying there has everything to do with them and nothing to do with you, with me. I know who I am. I know who I'm not. Nothing that you can argue with me or tell me will be able to shift my perception into a way that I know is inherently wrong for who I am. And I know to through my bodily experience extremely harmful for me and others. And so that's the thing. Like, I don't, I don't choose to be trans. I'm trans. I don't choose to be a lesbian. I'm a lesbian. And when I choose not to be those things, which I've done for long periods of my life, you know, I hurt myself. But then because I'm hurting myself all the time, I'm an asshole. You know, like I'm gonna radiate this out, this hurt out to others. And you know, people will be like, "Oh, Charlotte, you were never an asshole." But yet, I was a walking vortex of despair. You know, I was that character from Charlie Brown. Pig, no, not Pigpen, but you know, the cartoon character is just like carrying a cloud of doom. I didn't want to be that person. It's just kind of like that's how I tried to cope, and then that's what I brought into the room with me. And I don't do that anymore. And anybody who thinks that what I'm doing now is not right, when actually I've transmuted that cloud of want want into like a joyful expression in most moments, they don't really have any say here. Like, I don't, it doesn't matter. Like, you just go on and think that somewhere else.
Have you felt in our late bloomer lesbian group any times that you have um, felt excluded or not included, or are there, um, how can our members help you feel more included, or has that even been an issue for you in our group?
Not in this group, it hasn't, and I'm aware that there are some issues. I mentioned earlier that I've been like disengaging a bit from social media, and so I mean, I think as admins and moderators, you all know that that group is huge, and there's an overwhelming amount of sharing and posts, which is wonderful that we have such a great community, like a large community. But I have to really be careful about where I focus my attention, which is why I don't watch the news or really watch much TV at all. And so when I see, and it's not, I'm not talking specifically about this group, but when I see something on social media that's triggering to me, I move on. Because I've done that before, and I've gone in and I've, you know, deeply dove into the trigger, and I've been like, but like, I don't want to do that anymore. And so I have better things to do with my time. But yes, I have, and I still do struggle with personal encounters with friends and other people who I feel aren't seeing me clearly, or have some, I think for me, in some cases, I feel ignored um, in my femininity and in what I offer, as far as, yeah, being a really deeply and powerfully embodied feminine facilitator. And so for me, it's like, if I have people that I want to consider colleagues and friends, and they're not, and I'm showing them so much love, and just like, you know, and I'm not getting reciprocated that way, they're not supporting me, I'm still gonna love them. I can't help but do that, but it also hurts, and I don't want to be in a relationship like that where it's creating pain. So I make the difficult choice to like step away from those relationships until a time when they can see me more clearly.
You talk about a deep connection with community and online friends and friends in real life and colleagues, and your wife being supportive. if this is too personal of a question, we'll move on. But I was wondering if you might like to speak about your family, your parents, aunts, uncles, cousins. That is typically a hard one for many of us late bloomers to gain recognition, acceptance, and sometimes even keep a relationship, a loving relationship with family. If you would like to speak to that,
Yeah, I can.
please.
Yeah, that's definitely been like the most difficult thing for us, my wife and I, is, coming out was like unknown, so we feared a lot of things would happen that actually did not, and where we had a lot of anxiety about friends being like, oh, and just like rejecting us or whatever, or disengaging with us. The opposite happened, and people were just like, oh, cool, or oh, okay, I get that, or even like, yay, like my wife came out to our neighbor, and this is somebody that's a family friend, and after she talked to this person about what was going to be happening and who I am, I got a text saying simply, "You go, girl," from the neighbor. And and so, but that's not what your question was. The question was the difficulties. And so I told you I came out to my parents back in like 2017. And they handled it as best they could. And in the moment it seemed pretty okay. But I wanted to continue the conversation, and they weren't asking me any questions, and it was just kind of like, okay, whatever. And so that contributed to sort of the downward spiral that I went into, because I didn't feel like I had purchase to move forward. It was difficult to have this conversation with them, and when I did like bring it up to my dad months later, I was like, so you remember all the things I told you about being transgender? I was wondering, like, do you have any questions about that? Then what are your thoughts? And he was just like, no, I don't. And fortunately, that was temporary. And my mom said some really, again, like, she is who she is, and she says things without a filter. And so she said some things that were really hurtful and just absolutely ignorant, when I told her, or when I was beginning this process of like, yep, gonna transition, I gotta come out. And, like, she was like, oh, that's going to be horrible for you, horrendous for you and your family. And it pissed me off. And so I didn't respond, and I just kind of stared at her. And the funny thing is, she was like, will you please consider this further? And I was just like, I said nothing, but I was just thinking to myself, I've already told you that I've been considering this and spinning with this and analyzing it for 13 years. So no, I am not going to reconsider or consider it anymore because I've made my decision. And so, yeah, just like different things like that, because, trans people, we are special, we are rare. And and even though there's all this awareness now comparatively to when I was growing up, and people do want to do the right thing, and they do, often, like, they want to be understanding, but especially like dealing with an older generation that had an even more starkly, like, stark experience that alienated trans people. Like, they just not a thing, or that is a thing, like, as it, like, dehumanizing. so then there, of course, are rough patches, and it's still a process in a lot of ways with some of these people. But I think if I had like anybody who's dealing with this right now, but if it's you, like if I'm talking to a person who's like really struggling to come out and be who they are, it gets it gets better as you become more comfortable with yourself, as you trust yourself to be who you are, and to understand that you're beautiful and there's nothing wrong with you, and that really people want to know you and people want you to show up. And even the weirdest, not weirdest, even the most like staunchly heteronormative uncle that you have, at some point, as long as you're true to yourself and keep showing up authentically, firstly for yourself, you're gonna have moments with these people who you never thought you'd even be in a situation with, where you never thought that they would know this about you, this secret, you know. You'll be in places and they'll just like tell you straight out. I really admire the way that you've handled what you've been through, and I know I'll never fully understand it, and I don't, but you know, I have a lot of respect for you. And when you get that from like, when I get that from the guys in my relationship, like in my life, I'm just like, cool, thank you. Like, that means a lot. I appreciate that. So it does get better, but it also requires a lot of self-love, and so don't deny yourself that, and don't deny the world that. And for like parents and educators and friends who are seeing this with individuals in their lives and their communities, try, well, I mean, create that safe space where these people, these kids, can be who they are clearly and authentically, and allow them to play and understand that they don't have to have all the answers right away, and that this is a process of discovery. And guess what, you know, person that I'm talking to right now who has a young trans person in your life, or non-binary person, gender diverse person who's processing all of this, guess what, you are gifted with this wonderful experience of watching a human explore unseen aspects of who they are and bring those to life in the world. And what an honor that is for you, and what a gift that is for you to give this person. So, you know, own that and like show up for them in a way that's loving.
Beautiful. Um, I work in a school system, so I see a lot of um, children questioning their gender identity and questioning their sexual orientation, and they see me, and it's like it's a magnet, and I just create that safe space for them, and they just, you know, all of that, because they don't, a lot of them do not get that at home, and so they feel they have an adult they can just be around. And it's not like we're talking about it, we're not, you know, we're just talking about everyday things, we're talking about school, we're talking about their pets, we're talking about this, but it's that connection, and that I see you, and I see what I see, where you are, I see your journey, and that space to just let them be them for however long we get to speak is beautiful. And um, last year, um, in June, um, kids wore pride flags and pansexual flags and trans flags, and it was beautiful to see. Um, not being able to express that as a child myself, it was beautiful and it was tearing. And um, one student had a little pride rainbow flag that they made themselves. And so that part of me went, maybe their parents not welcoming to that because it looked homemade. And
Mm-hmm.
I just said, I love your flag. It's great. I said, Happy Pride. And and um, tears welled up in their eyes, and they just said, Oh my God, thank you. You are the first adult to acknowledge my flag. Thank you so much. And it's just like opening up space for people to be seen and be validated is so important. So I want to lead into this question for you. Um, with social media and with entertainment, most of our community is written by white males, white straight males. Um, how how do you feel when you see yourself supposedly portrayed? Like um, when I see lesbians, it's usually very masculine and very um, straight that way, and they're usually bitter and they're mean and they can't find love and it's a downgrade. And then bisexual people are usually written as well, they're only waiting for the opposite sex, and the same sex that they're in a relationship with is just a holding place until they find that opposite sex to connect with and to marry and to do life with. Um, and then non-binary people seem to be written very androgynous. Um, and trans people have been written going back so far back to where it's always a very cis male being put into this role and being either comedic or being very downtrodden. How do you deal with that, and how do you feel about that, and how it plays into you as a person, and how you maybe have seen it impact your community?
Wow. Well, okay, so for me it's a little bit different because like I mentioned not long ago, I tune out. Like I pop culture doesn't serve me. Um Social media serves me, but I have to be really intentional about it. And so I follow like some really queer people and some really radical cutting edge people who are working, doing this intentional um, psychological, spiritual work in the realms of gender and sexuality um, and sexual expression. Um, and I just think that, I mean, what you're pointing towards is the white male gaze and how that has been the central viewpoint of culture and still is, but it's breaking up, thankfully, and getting better. And so we have an opportunity now to really tailor what we consume on an informational and entertainment level, a media level, to what is our truth. And I don't want to get into like a discussion of post-truth or alternative facts because that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about is that all of us are whole and have an innate knowing of what it means to be us, what it means to be a person, what it means to be human. And the white male gaze is a cultural construct, and it's a really destructive and self-destructive one. And so anytime that we're looking out, and that's what a lot of media wants us to do, or is designed for us to do, is to look out through that white male gaze. Well, like if you're not actually white and male in that way, and really like who is, I don't know really any white males who actually are that self-destructive and colonial mindset and like just corrupt. Like, I'm sure those people exist. I don't know them, and thankfully I don't. And so I think we really have to question these narratives that come to us, and that should feel good. And sometimes being angry about it feels good. I have a really wonderful relationship with anger, and of course it wasn't always that way. And for a long time my anger wielded me, and I would get caught up in these big emotions and like the injustice of many things. um and so then from when we get into that space of being really consumed by outrage and anger, we're meeting the problem that we're trying to respond to with the problem. And so if we're truly committed to like, or we truly desire to have a more beautiful world and create a more just society or societies, cultures, I think that's one thing, is we need to pluralize all of this, and we need to understand that there's no cookie cutter, there's no one way. And then the other thing is the white male gaze, or the cultural dominance paradigm, the colonial mindset, does things a certain way and wants us to buy into that and do that the same way. And so to respond to that, and rightfully, like it when you really like feel differently than that and you look into it, it's enraging and alienating and all of those things. But pouring that and diving into that alienation, outrage, and the anger, and really then like turning that back against the thing that's making you feel that way, it's like the dark side. I mean, it really is. It's like the emperor's throwing lightning bolts at you and you're trying to do the same, but you can't because you're not so dark, and it's you're in this battle that's like hurting you because you're invested in it, and then you're trying to face it and use all of your what you think is your power to fight against it, and you're exhausting yourself and you're still getting fried, you're getting hurt. So what I think in my own experience the answer is to step out of that entirely, leave the Death Star, and like go to the garden. And you'll find that there are other worlds out there that aren't the white male gaze, that aren't the media, that aren't whatever is being mandated, or whatever it is that you're supposed to do. There are plenty of other worlds, and they are full of life, and they are full of people, and they are full of parties. And that's where you want to be, because you want to go and live your life and have fun. You don't want to get stuck in this cycle of retribution and shaming and all of the nasty violence. And I'm not talking strictly about physical violence, you know. Anyone who's on any spectrum, well, let's talk about like the gender spectrum or the sexuality spectrum, knows how violent just assumptions can be. I mean, it might seem subtle if that's not your experience, but when that's your lived experience, it's visceral. And so I think it just comes down to, you know, getting to the point where you're ready to make that choice of like, well, this isn't getting me anywhere, so I don't care. Like, you guys just go ahead and self-destruct. I'll be over here with my friends.
Yeah, I had to learn how to disengage because you do, when you suppress for so many years, you do get angry when you get depressed and you lash out, and it only makes it worse. It only makes it only makes it worse. And you have to learn how to disengage and to find your happiness in other places so you can express that and you can do it. And um, recently, um, speaking with a friend of mine um, that I've had since high school, um, who had moved away, and I've gone to see recently. Um, and I hadn't seen her in probably about 6 years, and it's been about 5 years. No, I take that back. It's been about 3.5 years that I've realized um, my gender identity and figuring it out. So it had been time since I've seen her. Um, and, um, we had talked prior, this is um, who I am. This is, if you could be more conscious about what you use gender wise with me, that'd be great. Um, and people that I've known for a while, I feel like I have to ease them into it. Um,
Yeah.
because they're so used to all certain things for so many years. So I feel like I have to ease them into it. And um, while I was there, we got into discussion a little bit more, and she's just like, I just don't get any of it. I just don't get any of it. It just divides everybody. Why can't we just be people? Like, I don't get any of it. What does it matter? What does it matter if you don't identify as female? What is it? I don't get it. Why can't I still do this? And why can't I still do this? And I can feel the anger growing inside of me, but I don't want to release it. I don't want to do that because then that's going to bring me to a different mental state. And so I just had to, that's okay. That's okay. It's a growing process. And I understand it's a growing process. So that's okay. So let's just move past it and we'll get there when we get there. And I invite you to look into it a little bit more, but you clearly don't have the space right now to take this in, and that's fine. And that's fine. So is that kind of where you do, you just, I hear what you're saying, but I'm gonna go over here and keep keep being me and keep being happy and finding my joy.
Oh, you know, I think I aspire towards that, and I've become more successful at it with practice, but I still lash out. I mean, recently I was hurt and I lashed out at somebody, um and then that just again like helped me realize, well, this relationship isn't functioning the way that it should be, or that I want it to, and so I'm just gonna, you know, step over here away from it for a while. But yeah, when you were speaking, I think what you're describing is beautiful. Like, that's a great response, and it's really also important, I think, to be clear that, like, anger doesn't go anywhere until it's expressed, but making the choice to not express it onto, you know, the person that seems to have brought it out, so I'm being ignored by somebody, and I'm becoming increasingly frustrated and irritated and angry with them, and I lash out. And so what's that gonna do, right? But that, I mean, they might not even know where that's coming from. And so I'm not communicating clearly with them my hurt. In order, but I can't just say like, oh, it's fine. I mean, I could tell them like you did. I think that's appropriate with your friend, like, but then own it. It's really important that I own my own feelings, and that I tend to them and lovingly witness them, and in that way, then I become more self-compassionate, and I understand, like, yeah, this still hurts, this is in this instance, like, somebody I want to be close to, somebody I admire, and I don't feel seen. And so then I just go like by myself, and I feel that. And there's other things that we can do, but I think one of my favorite things is just because the anger is like, it's kind of like masking in a way. It's a volatile response to a deeper feeling, I think, at least in my experience, which is sadness. And so I slow down, I feel into that sadness, and I have a good cry. I like let that out, and that was probably one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn, because I had so much unexpressed emotion and like trauma things stuck in my body. And those tears, they're not doing nothing. It's not just salty water coming out of your eyes. That's stuff you've been holding on to, and you can feel it emotionally in your sadness being released. And I'm no scientist, but I would venture to say, and I've heard people say, that there's some physical expression and release of that through your tears. And so, that in itself right there, for anyone who's trying to move through these really difficult emotional blockages, traumatic life experiences, being in a safe space in which to, grieve or just be sad. I've gotten to the point where I lean into that so hard that I enjoy it, because I know what's on the other side. And so there's a sweetness there. It's bittersweet, and it's sad. But then when I get that sadness expressed, what was tight and compact and, crowded by that sadness is now, that sadness has been expressed. So there's a lightness there, and there's an opening. And in that opening, in this emptiness, then something new and more joyful begins to bubble up effervescently, or comes in from sources that are close by that I didn't notice before. Our mind gets clouded by our anger and our sadness, and we might just miss that it's a sunny day and there's a nice breeze.
The empathy that both of you display to when you're hurt really is quite touching. I do understand that anger usually only hurts yourself, that you can hurt someone and they will step away from it, or they'll lash back. But you both finding more constructive, more adult, more mature, emotionally mature ways to express your feelings instead of presto cooker anger, spaghetti sauce all over their face. You're able to use your big girl words and your big person words to express how you're feeling and that impact. Charlotte, I just want to say thank you so much. I don't want to cut anything off or wrap it up, but we are at over 2.5 hours of time. I feel like you're my sister. I really have loved your openness and your vulnerability. And Drew, I've loved all of your questions and your perspective here too. I feel like I'm getting to know both of you better. And it is such an honor to just be part of this conversation for me. I'm growing as a human being, and I'm gaining a deeper insight, not only into both of you, but into me and how I perceive the world and how I want to be in the world going forward. And so I really look forward to my little piece of helping propel this story, and through that, hopefully opens other people's minds, or at least, increase awareness. And I think some of it is exposure, that exposure that's lacking in mainstream media that we're all aware of. Here's an opportunity to get to know each other within the group a little bit better and just be aware.
Well, and thank you both for, hearing my input the day before, and being receptive to that. I love these conversations, and I'm happy to have them frequently. And I felt like there was an intention here and a lot of potential for something to just really be new and expressive, and to serve this purpose of introducing people to the human face of trans women who are lesbians. I eat this stuff up, and these conversations are just like so important to me, because I learn so much about us, and thank you both. And thank you, Michelle, for spearheading all of this and having the intention to be that change in that way.
I feel like I personally can relate to so much around masking, about late blooming, about comp het, around even gender. And I don't really understand. On the one hand, I think my quest to understand just stems from something that I've always had my whole life, which is removing otherness from people and seeing the us in all of us and wanting to share that.